thank you everyone for coming to the PPPSA subcommittee meeting on, what's today's date? The 8th of April. So I guess I'll start with reading the land acknowledgement. I might wait just a moment. I see people coming in. And I think it's important for us to hear it. Okay, so this is the land acknowledgement that was written by RESJ members that we have just moments ago adopted. So we pay respect to the Miwok peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in Marin County and throughout the Miwok diaspora. We acknowledge that we are located on unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Miwok people of present-day Marin County and offer our care and gratitude for the land, water, air, and living beings here. We are committed to resisting colonialism and our ingrained colonial mindset and the imbalance with Mother Earth by honoring Miwok heritage through the support of Indigenous-led programming. In addition, we fully intend to move deeper than land acknowledgements and performative actions towards truly honoring the Coast Miwok heritage, making that heritage visible and present. Okay, so now I'll ask for approval of the agenda. Bruce?
Oh, you're voting on that?
I'll make a motion.
Oh, yeah.
I'll second the motion.
Cool.
Approve the agenda and affidavit of posting.
Okay, so now Bruce.
Yes.
Veronica?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll remember that for next time.
And you could say that you vote yes as well.
I also vote yes to approve the agenda. So we are the PPPSA. So what we aim to do is look at the Fairfax Police Department and to critically discuss and look at alternative ways of police practices for the town of Fairfax. And then for the meeting roles, Garrett, if I could have you put up the, oh my gosh, what are they called?
Community agreements.
Yes, the community agreements, thank you, for the process observation. So these are the norms that we have all agreed to as RESJ members and as PPPSA subcommittee members. I'm not gonna read them all, but please take a look. These are the norms that we are holding ourselves to for this meeting. Normally, we ask someone who is not white to be the process observer. That would be me. I don't feel like I am a great process observer, but I would be willing to step into that role for tonight. If we could have also a timekeeper and a note taker, that would be awesome.
I can keep time.
You'd say that. I'll be the note taker.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you, Garrett. We can move on from that screen. So yes, Lisa.
Just let me know when you'd like me to say something about facilitation tonight.
Yes. I'm trying to remember everything. So Lisa, now would be that time.
Okay. So I just wanted to let our members of the public know, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And in an effort to transition and capacity build, Alexandra and I are going to be sharing facilitation for the night. So she's going to take on the first half of our meeting, and then I'll be partnering with her through the second half of our meeting. So if you notice some facilitation changes, we just wanted to be transparent that we are going to do some gradual release here of responsibilities in the effort and goal that full facilitation will be held by the PPPSA subcommittee members eventually. So thank you so much, Alexandra, for taking that on tonight.
Yes, and I'm going to try my best to be like Lisa. So first item on the agenda is finalizing the agenda for meeting with the interim chief. So what we talked about 2 weeks ago was doing a data listening session for 30 minutes and then having the interim chief respond to the PPPSA's questions for 20 minutes and then having an open dialogue for 25 minutes. So we have 15 minutes to kind of finalize that and have any kind of final discussions before we put that into the finalized agenda for the next meeting. Bruce.
Just trying to recall our conversation. So the data listening session would be us listening to the interim chief present on the data that he brings. Okay, thanks. I just wanted to check that and make sure.
Yeah, Veronica.
First of all, you're doing a fabulous job, Alexandra. It's a lot to hold. I was curious. I know that we have intended to really make sure that we offer our questions that we've developed to Rico ahead of time of the meeting, and really appreciate that. And I'm imagining that those are, have we already sent that to him, those second series of questions? Awesome. Thanks, Alexandra, for holding that. And also was curious if there would be an opportunity for us to get the data that he's planning to present ahead of time as well, in like the agenda packet that would be available to the public, if that's something that's possible, and if it ends up feeling like he doesn't have enough time to get that to us, for instance, by next Thursday, so that we could have a week for the public to review that and for us to review that. I know I really appreciate in town council meetings how often the council members are so prepared with fantastic dialogue questions, because they have the opportunity to really review what presenters who come onto the council meetings and who they engage in dialogue with, that they really have the opportunity to be prepared for that. And so I was curious how you both felt about requesting that from Rico, if that feels practical or beneficial to you as well.
Yeah, I'm in support of that. I don't know what, I'm in support of asking. I don't know if he would be able to have that. But I did send him the questions about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I can reach out again if that's something that we feel we want to ask.
Awesome. Bruce, how do you feel about it?
That it makes sense to ask and just see how that works for Rico. How he had said earlier, as we discussed before our first session with him, that he didn't want to be expected to answer questions that he wasn't prepared for, I think is more or less what he had said, and we've honored that. In this case, of course, we'll be asking questions in the third part of this, or the I guess the second part. It's not on my screen anymore because I'm looking at you folks instead. So I assume that I would just say, talk with him and dialogue with him about what works, and I'd like to make it fairly comfortable for him, because this is a stressful situation for Rico. He knows he's on the spot. He knows he's on video, just like we are with this. But certainly I would support asking and seeing how he would like to handle it. Thanks.
Veronica?
Yeah, I was curious also in terms of the open dialogue, just for clarification, is that going to be an open dialogue with the PPPSA subcommittee members and RICO? And then there'll be time for questions from the public, or public comment rather, or is public comment going to be off? Here, we have to have public comment, right?
Yeah.
Great. So that, I'm imagining that is planned to be in the agenda, but I just don't see it listed in our draft agenda. So just wanted to remind us of that.
Yeah, so we've been trying to save time for public comment. So when we have 30 and then 20 and 25, so that leaves time for public comment. Right, Lisa?
Yes, we'll always have public comment. It's part of Brown Act protocols. And so while public comment at the end, because there are no action items so far on that agenda, we have yet to create the final agenda. That might change. But if there are no other action items, then we'll have public comment at the end.
Fine.
Yeah, I guess something that I would also like to clarify with that open dialogue time is how do we kind of want to go about that? Because something I was thinking about after the last meeting is with the open dialogue with him, I'm thinking maybe it's not, maybe it's just us, but if it is with him, perhaps that could be a time for him to ask us questions, so that it's not one-sided, and he, I mean, I'm sure he has questions. So wondering how we feel about that, and just in general structuring that open dialogue time.
I like that idea.
Yeah, I love that idea, Alexandra, to make space for Rico to ask us questions. I still do feel like it's really important to be able to have, oh, I guess that's our interim chief response to PPPSA questions is, oh, that's the questions that we already sent him. So I do feel, as I did the first or in the last meeting, excited about the opportunity to just engage in dialogue versus like a very managed. I will be engaging in dialogue with a lot of respect, and I imagine we all will, and kind of trust us to do that, and would love to be able to move into that space with him. So am comfortable with opening it up for him to ask us questions, and don't want that to mean we're not able to actually just engage in dialogue with him as well, with kind of reflections from what he shared, for instance, in the 50 minutes that we've given him prior to that. And wanted to say, I feel really fortunate. I've been meeting with this district attorney community group where we meet with Lori Fergoli, our DA, every month. And the conversations have begun to really focus on police chiefs throughout Marin County and RIPA data reporting, and a lot of things that feel really pertinent. And so I'm excited to just be really engaging about things that I imagine Rico has already, I think that Lori mentioned she's planning to have a meeting with the chiefs of police tomorrow. So it's not like anything will be new to him, but just to bring that conversation more to the public for more transparency, to understand what some of that is looking like from the more of that top-up district attorney perspective around RIPA data reporting, and our subcommittee in relationship to that.
Lisa, do you have your hand up? You're on mute.
It's such a role reversal. I almost forgot to raise my hand. So one of the things when we left the last meeting, you had agreed on timeframes and that you wanted dialogue, but you still were kind of left wondering about the way that you wanted to hold the dialogue. And so just as a reminder, you had talked about a couple different options. One is just open dialogue. The other is actual timed dialogue where, say, you know, Veronica, Alexandra, Bruce would all have 5 minute, Veronica, sorry, Bruce, Alexandra would all have 5 minutes each to ask your priority questions. So we did some brainstorming at the last meeting, but we didn't arrive at an actual answer. And I think it's important tonight for you guys to arrive at an answer about how you'd like to structure dialogue. Those also aren't the only options. There's other ways you can structure the dialogue, so that when Alexandra and I plan the next agenda for the end of the month, that can be taken into consideration. So just kind of a refresher there about where you left off.
And if we were to do something like that, we would probably want to plan for 4 people, because we actually are missing one member tonight. Yeah.
Lisa?
So you can adjust the times listed or a brainstorm. So as you're talking, you can also just be looking at the times and say, you know, actually, I think we'd like 5 minutes each to answer questions. And I think also perhaps there's value in open dialogue. From my perspective, having led complicated dialogue, and I've led dialogue with police and in particular schools before, both are really important. There's a, you know, importance that you all get your priority questions answered as community members and representatives of the larger Fairfax community. But there's also, you all know I'm a proponent of the power of dialogue. And I think that there's a lot of potential for dialogue to be generative. And as you guys come together in partnership, the opportunity to have open dialogue can really generate solutions and answers and thinking that you cannot get at by this like very formal constructed dialogue. So if I was going to make a kind of a recommendation as food for thought from past experience, you definitely need both. And you definitely need to make sure you don't leave out the opportunity for open dialogue to really be in community and learning together.
Veronica?
Thanks for that, Lisa, for that food for thought recommendation. I really appreciate it and feel strongly for it as well, the benefit of that open dialogue. So what if, just to put it into action words, what if we each offered 1 or 2? I wonder if you feel like you're strongly one or the other, kind of roughly 1 to 2 priority questions that each of us had, and hopefully a 4th member of our subcommittee would have, to be able to offer him, and then leave the rest of the time available for just open dialogue, rather than 5 minutes each. What do you think about that?
Bruce, are you?
Yeah. So I'm just wanting to clarify and understand. So that would be kind of similar to the questions, for example, in the first listening session, where we each came up with some questions, put together a list, and then just asked him to prepare in whatever order he wanted to address those questions. This would be kind of a mini version of that in the open dialogue portion. I'm just trying to understand what you were thinking. I guess I would picture that at the point at where we enter the open dialogue section, we would have had 50 minutes and probably a fair amount of information that he would have shared with us. So I guess I might expect that we might at that point regret that we had put a lot of other things down, that because we might have a new set of questions that people want to ask. But I'm just speculating.
Veronica, do you want to clarify or?
Sure, I see his hand up, but I wonder if quickly, my thought is that it's going to be in live time. So not questions that we've prepared to ask him, but just in response to what he shared, in the difference between what is alive now in our community and what information we have to what we have in 2 weeks when this meeting occurs. So informal and live and off the cuff conversation, dialogue questions that we feel are pertinent and important to get right there with him on, is what I'm visioning.
Lisa?
So just as clarification to your question, Bruce, so there's 3 sections that you guys brainstormed last meeting. The first is a data listening session where he's presenting data for approximately 30 minutes. The second is the part you were referring to, Bruce, where he's responding to the PPPSA questions that were on the list that you all reviewed. So that's happening regardless. As it is now, you guys can decide tonight to change it, but as the draft agenda was set forth at the last meeting. The third part is the open dialogue. So there's data, there's answering of the specific questions, and then the open dialogue was designed at our last meeting to address any questions that popped up, any follow-up, any burning issues that may have surfaced from the community in the meantime. So as you're thinking through, certainly any of this can change based on whatever you want, but those were the 3 main components. And right now we were just talking about the dialogue session.
Yeah.
Those were the other 2 parts, part 1, part 2 were pretty straightforward. Data, answer questions. The third was the dialogue.
So yeah, I understand that. I'm looking at the agenda too, and they're listed out there. But understanding that we're talking about the third section, I was just wanting to understand what Veronica was proposing or brainstorming about. Were you, Veronica, thinking that we each individually would, if we wish to, I suppose, just have some questions in mind, 1 or 2 questions in mind for the open dialogue? But it's still basically be an open dialogue, and we at the moment might decide, I don't want to ask those questions. I've got another question now that's more important to me. Yeah, so it's just kind of a suggestion to us on the subcommittee to possibly, if we would like, think ahead about any questions we'd like to ask. Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. I just took me a while to understand. Yeah, great.
Okay, so I think I also now understand a little bit more. So you're saying like follow-up questions, like things that popped into our minds as he was speaking, kind of thing. Okay, that I understand. I would just like to throw it out there that potentially maybe we reverse that and let him open the dialogue and ask us questions, and then let that lead into naturally us kind of following up on some things that we heard, or using things that we heard to inform our answer to his question. And then, if that makes sense, and then having a dialogue that way, just so that he does have an opportunity to ask us questions, since we haven't really given him that opportunity, just to put it the way that it is. We haven't given him that. So I think potentially that would be my suggestion. But I'm in full support of having open dialogue and allowing us to have follow-up questions as well. So yeah, just putting that out there.
And you might want to do a time check soon.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm supposed to be doing that. It is almost 7:30. We started a little late, but we're right about on time, I guess, given that we started late to finish up this section B.
Okay, so maybe we should wrap it up. So is there a kind of consensus on the way we want to have open dialogue? If someone wants to kind of, the thumbs up is for which option?
The less.
Yeah, Veronica.
the last thing that you just said sounds great to me. Inviting him to ask us any questions that he might have, and then letting that segue into our 1 or 2 burning questions that we want to ask as follow-up potentially. That sounds great to me.
Okay. And Bruce, how
Yeah.
about you?
Yes.
Feels good? Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great. So now I will turn it back over to Lisa so that we can move on to C.
You have to get used to me muting myself so much. Thank you, Alexandra. So item C, this is where you're going to think through potential development of a survey, a community survey. And as Alexandra and I were planning this agenda, I think one of the things that as reflection from the RESJ work and the PPPSA work has been really to have more specific goal setting happen. And so we thought it would be really helpful to start the survey conversation from the perspective of what are you trying to accomplish for the survey, and start from a goal perspective, and we call it backwards mapping. So you start with the end in mind, and then you're going to work your way backwards to inform how you're going to do that. And if our timekeeper could put approximately, it says 40, but let's shoot for 35. And if our timekeeper could let us know halfway through where we are. So in terms of what we'll do is think through our goal setting first. And once you feel clear on the purpose and objectives for the survey, we can talk about questions to brainstorm, who your audience for the survey is, and then potentially draft, if you get that far, draft some agenda items for the survey or question items for the survey. So what are thoughts about purpose and objectives in relation to Fairfax community and your audience? And then just, I'm looking down because I'm going to take a couple notes just for myself on my phone here. And the goal would be to actually have a purpose. We can do some brainstorming open dialogue, but the goal would be to have a purpose statement so that when you publicize the survey, you can really inform the community why you're asking people to engage in a survey. So just to get a sense of the end in mind here. So initial thoughts. And if we could start with Alexandra. Thank you, Alexandra.
So my understanding of this survey is that we're looking to get a better understanding of the way the community members of Fairfax look at police practices and alternatives to those practices. So my understanding is that perhaps we would propose some, I don't know, scenarios or questions about alternatives and kind of gauge the community's interest in that. That's my understanding.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Bruce.
You're muted, Bruce.
Just thinking on the fly about this, maybe a possibility would be to ask for example, thinking about possible alternatives in how mental health issues are handled. Maybe one question could relate to trying to ask whether how much people have seen that as being an issue, or I mean, if we could get subtle enough to ask how people have seen that relate to police practices. So just sort of starting from what are the issues and then working down to what might possible solutions be. And similar with other issues, you know, have you ever had interactions with the police, for example? That might be one thing, and then sort of go from there.
Other thoughts about a purpose statement, a goal for the survey? What are you even trying to achieve with the survey? Veronica.
Yeah, I appreciate the simplicity of Alexandra's response of essentially placing our mission as a subcommittee after survey the town of Fairfax to see how they feel about police practices and public safety alternatives. And funding, by the way, is the extra thing that town council put into our mission there, which I think is important too, to survey the town around how open our community members are to investing in these alternatives and what that would look like. I know there's a lot of comments that have been made in town council meetings around, how much money people pay in taxes, how much money is already going to police budget, and just kind of opening that dialogue up to have open comment, so we can really get a sense. The purpose feels like we're really taking our mission as a subcommittee and asking the public to directly speak to that. And the last thing that I'll say is it feels really, I think when the survey was suggested in the summer, it seemed to come out of a sentiment that systemic racism is not present in our community and not something that is at all involved in the way that our policing operates. Yet what happened throughout the summer was this awakening for a lot of folks, and in our RESJ mission statement, it's articulated an awakening of recognizing the ways in which policing is something that has felt very intertwined with systemic racism. And so this survey feels like an opportunity for us to get to the really dirt around what that feels like in Fairfax for our community members. Is systemic racism something that is showing up for them in the way that policing is operating? And yeah, that feels like, as I am approaching this, a really centered purpose.
So any thoughts about how you'd like to phrase that if you're partnering what you just said with what Alexandra said? So her purpose, better understanding of the ways community members of Fairfax look at police practices and alternatives to those practices. This is a draft, not final form, of course, but.
Understanding if folks of color, especially, feel that they are more or less safe in the presence of police officers in our town. Or I guess that's very specific. That would be a specific question, but yeah, what do you, Bruce or Alexandra, is there a way to phrase that as a mission? That's a great question, Lisa. To investigate the
I have a potential summary.
Great.
That you could push back on. So draft language, of course, since this is on the fly. So purpose of the PPPSA survey is to gain a better understanding of the ways community members of Fairfax look at police practices and alternatives to those practices, particularly in relationship to how members, I learned this term the other day. And so I think, part of our anti-racist work is to ensure we're continually learning, even if you've been doing this a long time. And so I heard the term global majority instead of BIPOC, and I'm really a fan of that term. So I'm going to sneak it in here, but I just want to explain my language. So to those practices in relation to how members of the global majority experience policing in Fairfax, probably a term not easily translatable across the community yet, but perhaps worth noting. Bruce.
I like that, but and I don't want to interrupt this creative process, but just throwing out that There might be other biases that we might be curious to learn about, possible biases or possible perceived biases. For example, when my son was much younger than he is now, and actually there was a previous police chief before Chief Morin, he used to feel, and this could just be because of his age and because of the kind of things that he was getting into, but he used to feel like there was a bias on, as he called it, harassing young people. So just, do people feel like there are any biases that they have perceived?
So one thing to consider when you're developing a survey is, separating purpose and goal of the survey from actual survey questions that are going to help you accomplish the goal. So just as you're thinking through a purpose statement, the purpose statement is really kind of the obvious, right? Like, why are you asking the town of Fairfax to engage in the survey? What's your hope? What is toward what end? But then you can include all of the questions like what you just mentioned, Bruce, inside of that survey. So
Yeah,
the purpose.
I wasn't necessarily posing the wording of a question, but just sort of thinking about the possibly including a little bit broader range.
In the purpose statement?
No, I don't know whether it would be in the purpose statement. No, that's why I was saying I didn't really want to interrupt your creating the purpose statement wording, but I was just throwing out that thought that.
I'm just trying to summarize, not create. I'm like, I'm not a member here. Veronica.
Bruce, I think that's so important. I don't know that, I'm curious if you could incorporate it into the purpose. But I do feel like it's so important to understand if there are sentiments of discrimination based on age, gender, English as a first language, whether you only own a home here or not, those types of things feel like really important as we go deeper into the next step. So I'm really glad that you raised that. And then just had another purpose thought, which was, it feels like the intention also is to really recognize and to gain public input around how I view our subcommittee as this interface between the public and the police department to really engage in a really productive dialogue around ways that our public feels like we can evolve the way that we're offering public safety within the town of Fairfax. So gauging community input around ways that our police, as any, like a strategic review of a business happens every 5 years, and we say, how are we doing well? Where can we grow? And that's what I'm hoping we're developing, flexing that muscle, that this is a healthy dialogue to be engaging police departments around with public input and transparency, and really centering that in the survey.
Mm-hmm.
Alexandra, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that for the goal and the purpose, I think personally, I feel that it's quite simple to just put the community, because all of those people are a part of the community. So when we say community, we are including all of our people of color, all of the people, LGBTQ, all of those people are a part of our community. And then in the survey, go into those specific questions about age, race, gender, identity, all of those things. So I think that in the wording of the purpose, it could really be quite simple to just put that we're hoping to get a better understanding of the community and the way the community feels about the Fairfax Police, about police alternatives, about funding and how to reallocate the funds to alternatives. So I think that could potentially solve that issue of, because we want to include everyone, but I think naturally community includes all of us. It's only until we pick it apart that we find out that some people it doesn't, some people it does, right? So I think we're asking the community here, and we're trying to engage the community. So that would be my only input. But
Do you have a proposed purpose statement?
I would suppose it's kind of not far off from what we have, that our purpose is to get a better understanding of the perspective of the Fairfax community on things such as the police department, the police practice alternatives, on reallocating funds. So I don't know if anyone has any additional input, but off the top of my head, that's what I feel the purpose is.
Veronica.
Sounds great, Alexandra. I think it's important too to be sure that the phrase public safety instead of police alternatives just feels more forward thinking, yeah. And so I would love to be able to have that, if that feels comfortable to both of you. So reviewing police practices and public safety alternatives, and the reallocation of funds to support those public safety alternatives, if our town is open, if community members are open to that.
Bruce.
I like that, and I'm wondering about, instead of saying reallocating, to just say allocating, or possibly allocating / reallocating, but I think allocating would work just fine. That doesn't necessarily, we don't necessarily have to assume that any funding changes would be taking from this, putting it over that. It could be, yeah.
So the shortened version I have, and I don't think we need to wordsmith it. My goal in this is just to be clear about a purpose before you develop questions, is just to gain a better understanding of the ways community members of Fairfax look at police practices and public safety alternatives, and allocating funds to support the work. Does that seem like a good direction for you? Okay, Bruce?
Yes, yes.
All right. So do you feel good to move on to the next part? All right, so we'll move into brainstorming potential survey questions. And then if our note taker could help out with collecting those questions, please.
And it's been 16 minutes so far.
All right, so we have about 20 left. Veronica.
I'd love to hear, Alexandra, your questions first, and just wanted to say I'm not going to take notes while I'm doing this. I'm going to re-listen to this and take the notes. So in case you're wondering why I'm not typing.
Okay, that's good. That's going to reduce facilitator anxiety. I appreciate you saying that. All right, Alexandra, why don't you take the lead on this?
So I think we started this conversation a little bit in that I'd love to have questions right off the bat about gender, race, and police practices specific to those experiences. And so I'm wondering, I think that it would be okay to ask for people to put their race or ethnicity, their gender identity, those things, so that it then informs the next questions specific to those experiences. Have you experienced, do you feel you've experienced, as Bruce mentioned, harassment based on your age, things like that, I think are important. Not sure about the ordering of when those would come in, but I think those are important.
Thank you, Alexandra. Bruce.
I realize I think I used the word harassment earlier, but I would I think it would be what you would call a leading question to to let our assumptions about what we might think an answer might be to sort of frame the way we word the questions. So in trying to, I'm just wondering about trying to word that in a way that's just like, have you experienced differing treatment or perceived differing treatment or differing level of attention, something like that, so that it could be, not presupposing the answer.
Alexandra.
Yeah, full support of what Bruce said. Also, I'm thinking perhaps something about just in general, not even specific to the Fairfax police, but like, do the police make you nervous? Are you nervous when a police drives by? Things like that, because I think that's very real for especially people of color. So, and it's not necessarily specific to the police department that is around you, but in general, in our society, there is that idea about police. And so I think that'd be good information to be able to assess and see how we can work to have people not feel that way, at least in Fairfax.
Can I share just a couple thoughts about just quality of survey questions? So not in relation to anything anybody said here, but just in general, when formulating survey questions, you'll want to think about a balance between quantitative questions and qualitative questions. And you'll also want to make sure, well, certainly you all have your own experiences with the police, and your families and community members and children have their experiences with the police. And so you certainly have experiences that you can predict what some of the concerns and questions might be, but it's going to be really important to get clean data. And so you want to make sure that your questions are targeted enough that somebody's going to answer the question that you really mean, and also are not leading the participants of the survey in any one direction, because you want to be able to have enough open-endedness in your questions that people can openly respond to their personal experiences, and you're not going to be leading them to a response. So just kind of as you're thinking through your questions, you'll want to make sure that you have a balanced survey of all types of questions, and get enough data that's unique to each participant so that you can inform your solutions in a way that's authentic to the survey participants, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Veronica.
Yeah, I have a few questions to throw into the mix, and also just wanted to ask, did you both receive, I sent it out and we haven't engaged in any dialogue about it, but I wanted to make sure to make the space to do that now in public. Did you receive the Strategies for Policing Innovation PDF that I've sent out? And it feels like a really helpful baseline for exactly some of what Lisa's guiding us through in terms of types of questions, whether they're open-ended or Likert scale, and how to be sure that there's as much non-bias as possible in the way that we ask the questions. I'm just curious if you both received that, and if.
Yeah, I have not read it. I'm sorry. Now that you mentioned it.
That's okay. No, you don't have to, but it feels, just wanted to put it back out on your radar because it's very helpful. It makes it feel not as overwhelming to me as I think about us designing this survey, to realize we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and that there are models that have successfully, this comes from Portland particularly, that this where they've done a lot of really good work on engaging with community as far as policing is concerned. So strategiesforpolicinginnovation.com is where that's at. And I'll send it back out to our subcommittee. Yeah, that question, Alexandra, that you were kind of hinting at, and just to lift that back up too, and the language that I have appreciated is, do you feel more safe or less safe in the presence of a police officer when police are around? Do police who are not white who are the global majority, members of the global majority? Do they make you feel more or less, does that impact how you feel about your police department in your community? And the question of whether or not you feel like you can rely on the police to come to a situation and de-escalate the situation, or if you feel worried when you call the police. I realize how I'm wording it is not non-biased, so I'd love to not use that, but that sentiment of like, do you rely on the police to de-escalate a situation, or do you hesitate to call the police because that isn't the case, or how you feel? So just finding a way to tease that out in a way that's really clean feels really important to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Other thoughts? Bruce?
Yeah.
And then if you could all just mute when you go off, there's a little bit of background noise.
Yeah,
Bruce.
I hear what you're saying, Veronica, about the some ability to collect information about de-escalation. I think that's important. And I was thinking about possibly questions that similar to the questions about who the respondent is, some questions about, have you, maybe something like how many times a year on the average, or something, however we word it, have you called the police, or have you ever called the police in town? And also, have you had interactions with police in which you didn't initiate it, the police initiated it? So police initiated interactions with you, or interactions where somebody else called the police. I don't know whether that's something that you would want to ask, but interactions where somebody else called the police, that would be a police initiated interaction, I suppose. So however that was. But of course, there are a lot of different police initiated interactions. It may be a police officer asking you for information about something that you weren't related to at all, or coming to help you even though you didn't call for them. But so it's, anyway, some way to just sort of ask, what kind of interactions have you had?
I'm gonna check in with Alexandra and then head to Veronica. Alexandra, do you want to add anything? And then Veronica?
Not specifically. I'm loving the way that Veronica's wording questions, because I have not like quite put the wording into thought just yet. So I really appreciate that, Veronica. So I kind of want to hear what Veronica has to say.
All right, perfect. Veronica.
Thanks, Alexandra. I really am appreciating this process with the both of you. This is very exciting. I'm curious also to know, to what extent do the folks within our community feel like there's a clear path of expressing what would be the word to describe this? I don't like this word, but complaints or challenges with the police, if there's a clear understanding of what steps to take if that occurs. And something that I'm envisioning allowing our subcommittee or another committee, if it were to ever be formed alternative to us or in addition to us, where that we really help encourage people to be able to feel safe in that process. And maybe they already do, because I know there's a link on the police website, Fairfax Police Department website, to be able to do that. But I'm just curious, do people know about that? Have you ever used that? And how to make sure that we can promote that, to create a really open chain of communication from public to town council and to the police department and our subcommittee. And then another question feels like how, in terms of public safety alternatives, mental health continues, as Bruce, you mentioned earlier, to be it takes up the majority, if I'm not mistaken, of police calls or police responses. I know in the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Commission from Marin County, that the data that they're pulling, the San Rafael Police Department has pulled, that seems to be by far and large, and I believe it's true for our police department too. I'll be excited to talk to Rico about that. What public safety alternatives to address mental health crises could be available, or would, if they had a number, which we do have, do they know that there's a number to call for mental health crises? Have they tried to call that number, and has it been successful in helping the situation? Or do they find themselves feeling like they need to call the police in addition because the mental health unit is not available? So that those kind of questions can help be the foundation from which we then make recommendations for the allocation of funds to support a 24/7 mental health crisis unit that has more than 2 people, which is currently what Marin County has. Just trying to really tease out that information so that we can take that back.
Bruce. And Bruce, can you give us a time check?
Yeah, it's now right around 30 minutes on this. So basically it's 8 p.m. So we have about half an hour left, and that's for public comment in the last.
So we have 5 more minutes on this section.
Okay. So yes, Veronica, in response to that, what was coming up for me was the question of sort of, were you aware that there was a number to call for, specifically to go directly to mental health help? And if you did know about that, would you be inclined to call that under any circumstances? Or yeah. That's it. I just bring that up.
How will you, or what are your thoughts about getting input on the community-based solutions component? You mentioned Oregon, and there's huge differences nationally in terms of the community context compared to Fairfax. And one of the essential elements of any strategy is that it's community-based. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are about community-based solutions and exploring any of those solutions on the survey. And by no means am I implying they need, I'm not trying to influence survey at all. I am just trying to dig into questions that could potentially be relevant for you all to consider. Any thoughts about that? Bruce.
Well, I think it was mentioned earlier that leading toward some more open-ended ability for the survey respondents to just give us their thoughts. So, and more or less open-ended way of asking about any community opportunities for community engagement, opportunities for alternative models, alternative ways for public safety responses to different situations, including mental health situations or including other ones. I also should throw out that I keep forgetting to say it, that one of the components of the Fairfax Police is that we have a 911 dispatch center. It's fairly unique to have this local 911 dispatch center, and it's open 24/7. So one of the interactions that people can have is to walk in the door and walk up to the window and talk with the dispatcher at any time, day or night. And people do that. They'll come in and they'll talk about a stolen bike or something like that, and just do that directly.
We have just a couple more minutes left. Veronica.
I'm really glad that you raised that question, Lisa. I forget at what point in the dialogue with the town council over the fall, it feels like it was somebody had raised the acknowledgement of how often like neighbor disputes and just, you know, nonviolent conflict can become the motivator for people to call the police, and the opportunity for community mediation. And there are various resources already in the county of Marin that are free for mediators for public. And I'm curious, I have been curious about what it could look like to have designated mediators in our community that, for instance, on Nextdoor, you know, you could identify yourself, or on Only in Fairfax Facebook page, or all of the ways in which the places that our community, or have them listed even in throughout town, and list these numbers so that depending what neighborhood you're in, you can like call that mediator to help resolve the issue, rather than overburdening our police department with something that really could be a chance for the community to be growing in their relationship with each other, rather than having the risk of somebody getting excited, or to have, you know, just the non-restorative recourse. And so I would be curious to see if people would be open to things like that, if they would be interested, or, you know, if there were designated community mediators, would you be inclined to call them when there was a conflict that you were witnessing that was nonviolent? Or to your, yeah, we have to figure that wording out, but, you know, would you be open to calling them and instead of the police? Feels like a great avenue to begin starting that. And I just wanted to remind us, I think we're all aware of it, but especially to make sure that folks listening from the public know that because of the town survey that the town staff developed right now for the interim chief of police, that we're gonna have, you know, there's a few questions in there that really do pertain to this survey and to RESJ. And so we'll be able to really, I'm envisioning getting a lot of fodder for this survey from that one too. I don't feel like it's exhaustive, but that it'll really give us, generate more questions. It'll kind of touch on some of these questions already for us.
So I'm guessing we're probably at time, Bruce. You're on mute. You're on mute, Bruce.
I'm sorry, it's 8:07, 8:08 now, so we're definitely at time for this item.
So do you all feel ready to talk next steps about this survey in terms of where you want to go at your next meeting? And then when Alexandra and I plan that agenda, we can incorporate it. So thoughts about, just last thoughts on your next steps, and then we'll include that in the next agenda. Alexandra.
So I know that in our little RESJ bubble, we've been speaking a lot about money and budgets. So I'd love for us to talk about the potential budget we may need for the survey, whether we put this survey online, if it gets mailed to houses, how do we want to put it out there? Also knowing that I believe it was town council, when they were forming the RESJ, had advocated for a survey in general being put out by RESJ. So wondering if we want this to be a section of a greater RESJ and put out one survey that can go to all the houses, or if we want this to be separate. Just thinking in terms of money, perhaps it would be smart to put them together, but maybe it's not, you know, I don't want us to only think about the money, but just considering those options. And then with that, of course, translation, accessibility, all of those things come with it. So I'd love for us to talk about all of that.
So it sounds like at our next meeting, well, actually it won't be the next one because that's the one with interim chief Tabaranza in May. Perhaps the next step would be to read some resources around surveying regarding police practices, and then we can schedule that for our next meeting in May. Any other last thoughts before we take public comment?
Well,
Bruce?
it sounds to me that I thought this was a very good conversation tonight. We had a lot of different parts of thoughts about the survey, but I appreciate, Veronica, your offer to listen to the meeting and try to put this together for us. So I think this is a great starting point, but it's kind of a lot of really good pieces, but we still need to pull it together into a more coherent whole. So those notes will help a great deal.
So as a next step, just for our note taker tonight, it would also include Veronica perhaps bringing a draft set of questions to our next meeting that you guys could work from. And then before we move on to public comment, I just wanted to make note of some highlights so far from this meeting. And I'm actually going to put a challenge to you really quickly. How do you think our dialogue is going in this meeting? Just what are your observations compared to last meetings? Alexandra.
So I feel like everybody is being heard, and building off of ideas a bit more, hearing things and then applying it to move forward instead of continually circling around an idea. I feel like this has been very productive, so feeling good about the conversation.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Thank you, Alexandra. Bruce.
Yeah, it feels generative and creative, and the way creative processes feel, which is that at least in the early stages, it's sort of like throwing a lot of stuff out, and it's at this point we aren't at the next stage where it starts to come together and gel, but that's fine because we don't have to do that now. So it also feels a little unhurried, which is I appreciate.
Thank you, Bruce. Veronica, any thoughts from you, or did you just want to leave it at that?
Yeah, thanks. I'm really grateful to Alexandra and just feeling the way in which you're helping to move us through as well, and feeling a lot of excitement to be getting at this finally with all of you, and excited to hear from members of our public to see what they'll suggest too.
Thank you. I think it's really important to note progress and highlights, and particularly when teams have had challenges. I think that progress can be kind of food for the soul to continue to stay in that generative place. And so I wanted to just take a pause and have you all really notice how far you've come. I also particularly want to notice, and there's a ton of research on dialogue structures and how team dialogues actually evolve over time. And so I really want to highlight that generative part and the way that, and what Alexandra said around building on each other's ideas, what Bruce said about, it feels generative and it feels creative. And that is dialogue at its best, where everybody can show up as their true authentic selves. They can also be heard as their true authentic selves. And you're not listening to refute or debate, you're listening to understand. And that's a huge key shift that I've seen here in the last 2 meetings that you all have held, is a commitment to understand. And you might have a different opinion, you might add something to what you're understanding, but I do really see this seeking to understand. And I think that's really shifted your outcomes. So I just wanted to have you all make note of that progress. So are we good to jump into public comment? All right, so if Garrett could help us out here.
Okay, so if people could raise their virtual hand, and it looks like Mimi Newton would like to speak.
Great, so we'll officially open public comment. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mimi, you just need to unmute yourself. There you go.
This is Patrice, again, using Mimi's device. As a former member of this committee, I feel like the racial makeup of this committee is such that you guys should actually talk to African Americans in this town prior to doing a survey. Your questions are so off base and so leading and frankly just so offensive based on my being an African American in this town dealing with police on a day in and day out basis. And it also feels like the right hand isn't talking to the left hand. And Bruce, I love you, but I got to call you out on this one. You sit on the town council and you let this committee just spin, not telling them what the town council has already decided. And I feel like that's what you can bring to this committee, letting them know what people have already decided so you don't spend an hour talking about stuff that you can't impact. Last thing I'd like to say as a member of PPPSA is you agreed with Interim Chief Tabaranza that you would meet with him on the 22nd with the questions you've given him. It is so unfair for you to flip the game and still ask him to participate. So I hope he pushes back on you guys. Thanks.
Okay, any other virtual hands? If anyone would like to speak. And, oh, Joe McGarry. Okay, Joe, go ahead.
Thank you, Garrett. Yeah, and thank you to the committee. A really great work session tonight, and getting a lot accomplished. And a couple thoughts, and in talking about, Bruce brought up the 911, and then there was a follow up on the calls that are handled. The Fairfax PD puts up a call log every week with every call that comes through the 911. So you can go through there and really figure out what they're answering to. And there are lots of neighborhood negotiations and conflict resolutions. But maybe something also you could ask Interim Chief Tabaranza is it's peppered with different acronyms and abbreviations, and it might be helpful to I don't know what they are, and it might be helpful for you folks as you look at them to get some clarity on what those are. I think they're law enforcement specific acronyms, and then just in terms of the survey, like yeah, I think there's so much good stuff that you all talked about tonight, and I think I think it's an opportunity to hone in on not only the experience in Fairfax, but the larger trauma that folks may have from experiences outside of Fairfax, or even things that they've witnessed, on their news feeds on Twitter, or that's all very real, and trauma and affects the way that they walk through their life and the way that they feel about police. Even though they may never have had a direct negative experience with a Fairfax police officer. So maybe working to capture that. And then, yeah, lastly, it's the thing that's really heavy and folks don't really want to talk about. But yeah, maybe there's space within the survey to ask if folks know what the policy of defunding the police is, and maybe exploring within that, and and talking about, the three pieces and asking folks if, the notion of people having their basic needs met might lead to less crime. That if the appropriateness of mental health work and social workers answering certain calls, and then still asking, about violent crimes and like that, that there is a role, where these other folks, these alternatives might not work, and asking questions about that. And then one other is like folks feeling on traffic and parking, if there's possibilities there, to how folks feel about that, to possibly have some alternatives. It's kind of a little talked about space in terms of alternatives, but I think there's also some opportunity. But yeah, just a lot of gratitude for your folks and all the work you put in tonight. And thank you for global majority, Lisa. So take care.
Okay, anyone else? Oh, okay, I see another person. Ellie, go ahead.
Garrett, can I ask that you give our members of the public a 1-minute warning when their time is about to finish, please?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that. Yes, I can do that.
Thank you very much. And members have 3 minutes. I'm not sure if that was stated in the beginning.
Can you hear me okay? Great. I just wanted to share a little bit of information that I have and some thoughts. One is just about the mental health response team. I've been looking into their work just a little bit due to an organization that I'm involved in, and learned that they actually have the right to 5150 people, which means involuntarily commit them to psychiatric evaluation, and pending those results, actually involuntarily commit someone long-term. So just wanting to note that personally, I'd love to see something else maybe in line with MH First over in Oakland. That's my understanding, a little bit more community-based, a little less governmentally connected. Just one piece of information. And then I do think it's important to ask racial identity in the survey. And I don't know if there will be optional versus non-optional. I'm guessing it's a virtual survey. So I know that that's an option sometimes to have required entries. And my thought would be to have that be required just so that we know who's weighing in and can track the elements of race in the responses. I think that's a really crucial piece of information and context. I also think after that, maybe having an optional question about, do you have any other identities that you feel like are pertinent, and maybe even leave a few examples like age, gender, self-expression, just so people have the opportunity to share more should they want to, even homeowner, And then one other thought around the do you feel safer with police presence? I love that question. And I'm just tracking that as lovely as our town police could possibly be, they are linked to, they reserve the right to physically overpower one's body autonomy if they deem fit, even if that's just putting them in a car and not even touching someone much. Like to have the right to take someone away in a car is noteworthy. So, and then to a larger policing organization that is a pipeline to prisons and doesn't always have police with the same potential Fairfax style. So just sharing some thoughts. Thanks for your work.
Okay, any other speakers? Just need to raise your virtual hand. And let's see. And I would say that's it. There's no other speakers.
All right, we are going to close public comment for items on the agenda. And if we can remove those speakers from the panel here, then I'm going to go ahead and open public comment for items not on the agenda. And then Garrett, if you could just show that finger, probably will work better because we can't read the sign.
Sorry, I just whipped it up and apparently it wasn't very good.
It's all good. It's all good. I think we all knew what it meant.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any public comment for items not on the agenda?
Okay, I don't see any virtual hands up. Anyone? Okay, no virtual hands.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment for items not on the agenda. And then I'm very happy to hand it back over to Alexandra, who is going to bring us to a close tonight. On time. I'm also going to make a note that we are so on time tonight.
Awesome. So in efforts to make sure that we end on time, I'll move forward with next steps. So Veronica, I don't know if you have any, but I have down that I will email Interim Chief Tabaranza about potentially sharing his statistics with us as a part of the agenda packet, I believe. And then this is what I wrote down. Feel free to let me know not to do this, but I was going to include letting him know that we would have time for him to ask us questions if he'd like to send them in advance or prepare some, whatever that may be. And then for Veronica to bring a draft of questions for the survey based on what we talked about tonight. So Veronica, did I miss anything? Or Lisa or Bruce? All good? Awesome. Okay, so then items for the next meeting. We kind of briefly touched on the further development of the survey. Are there any other items for the next agenda?
This was from my list. This is obviously not my item. Just making that very clear for the public that you wanted to discuss the budget for the survey, just in relation to the other budget conversations happening about RESJ. And you also wanted to address, this could be in the same agenda item, but you wanted to address whether or not it would be a general RESJ survey or just a PPPSA RESJ survey, PPPSA survey.
Veronica?
Yeah, I know that in the town council meeting last night, it was raised the question around whether or not it's necessary to continue to have Lisa's facilitation for our subcommittee. I have a lot of personal gratitude and place deep value in Lisa's facilitation for all of our committees, but just feel like it would be a great conversation for us to have as a subcommittee to know what the timeline looks like for that and what that gradual release timeline looks like, and just feel really prepared and not like we're reacting, but really consciously moving through that together.
Yeah, Bruce?
I'm just, thank you for that, Veronica. I think that given that we're talking about a meeting that's 4 weeks from now, the next PPPSA meeting, because 2 weeks from now is the one with Rico, that I think would be after, I was just going to pull up my calendar, but it would take too long too. I think that would be after our next RESJ meeting. And I guess I'm assuming that on the next RESJ meeting, we will have a discussion about both budget and facilitation and how they relate to each other. So I'm just wondering how those two fit together. But we can always take it off of our agenda if we feel like we've already discussed it on the RESJ meeting. So yeah.
Okay, any other items? We're good to move on. Oh, Veronica.
One last one. I imagine then, thanks for reminding us, it's going to be a month before we actually have a normal subcommittee meeting again, but that hopefully the town survey for the questions regarding the police chief, that will be closed by then, and we might want to review that or ask for town staff to give us that information, or all of the public, of course, would have access to it, but just to really engage with that if it's wrapped up.
Okay. Are we okay to move on? Yes. Okay. Oh, process observer. So I feel like we briefly touched on this as well. I feel like our conversations were very productive. I feel like there was definitely active listening, discussion, not debate. So I feel that our norms were very much held. and that this conversation moved us forward in our work. So now I'll open it up for any appreciations and last thoughts, I guess. Bruce?
Well, I've gone first, I think, before on appreciation, so I don't want to make that a habit, but I have so much appreciation that I have to say something. So I appreciate all of us on this meeting. I think this went very well, and I appreciate you, Veronica, for your very careful, thoughtful approach to trying to tease out what you believe we need to tease out, and you just care for this work. Alexandra, I really appreciate your courage in stepping in to greater and greater roles, and I envision that as a long lifetime path for you, and I'm so happy to see that, and so happy to have you here taking care of this committee and of RESJ. And Lisa, this is the beginning of a transition, and I know that you've talked about this transition right from the beginning. It may be happening I can't imagine that any of us could picture how all of this would unfold, but of course we knew that we wouldn't be able to, so that in itself isn't surprising. But here we are, and I'm glad you're here with us now, and I really appreciated our beginnings to transition tonight. So thank you.
Veronica?
Yes, to all of that, Bruce. Thanks for your consideration and your words. And it feels like your big heart. And I wanted to say thanks to Garrett for being here tonight with us after being with town council all last night, and really appreciate the work that you do for our town. And just feel grateful for the relationships that we're building together.
So I am very appreciative of both Bruce and Veronica for trusting me to hold this position and allowing me to attempt to lead tonight. I will get better. And especially I appreciate Lisa for her guidance. I was thinking about today that like facilitating is one of those things that everyone thinks they can do until they try to do it. And it's like a million times harder than you think. And so it's definitely a unique skill that I will try my best to gain. So I appreciate everyone, and especially the community as well, for bearing with me while I figure it out. So I just really appreciate all of you. And yeah, I guess we are at 8:34, so pretty much on time for us to wrap up. Garrett, do you have something? Or, okay.
Oh, no, I was just saying, good job.
Oh, thank you.
Unlike the council, you mean?
Oh, no, council's awesome. I love staying there till 1:20 in the morning. I don't know if I should be saying that in something that's recorded. Okay, so we're good?
Yeah,
Now we can- Okay.
thank you.
Adjourn the meeting. Great job, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.